when people start talking to you about hard things, before you feel like you need to give them an answer, just use the line, before I answer, can I ask, why is this topic important to you?
The Art of Hard Conversations is designed for people that want to share about God, but find it difficult to do. Can you give some of the examples to the audience of how to approach tough encounters?
Sure. What I really encourage people, especially, encourage Christians. We have a lot of hard conversations in our lives because we follow Jesus. Most of us don't like making people feel uncomfortable or talking to people about sin. Like in ourselves, we wouldn't necessarily do that. But when we're walking with Jesus, he prompts us into these conversations. And to be equipped, I think there are some things that we really can learn by observing Jesus. And one of those things is that he asked a lot of questions. I love that our God had this compassionate curiosity that expressed about the people that he encountered. So that's one place that we can really go, is to make a list of questions to ask people about themselves, become really curious about the people in your life, and ask them all kinds of things about themselves. And when people start talking to you about hard things, before you feel like you need to give them an answer, just use the line, before I answer, can I ask, why is this topic important to you? Sometimes people will ask us, will complain about the church or complain about things they've heard on the news. Oh, you're one of those Christians. I bet you believe in right to life. I bet you're opposed to abortion. Sometimes we get into a battle we don't need to, and we can just say, before I answer, can I ask why this is important to you? Or why is this important for you to understand how a Christian thinks about this? What's your history with Christianity? And that gives you some information before you plunge in, because we have a lot of conversations that aren't the conversation we're really having. I don't know if that makes sense, but I used to have a ongoing sort of debate with a gentleman at the gym where I worked. And he would constantly challenge me about the reality of God. And every week I thought I was winning this, discussion. And then finally I thought to ask him a question and say, "What, Jim, why is it so important for you that God doesn't exist?" And then he talked about, like, if God exists, then it means that he watched the brutality of my father toward my mother and toward me, and he did nothing. And that in that moment, God so convicted me, like, did you not pay attention? Like, you weren't having a debate about my existence. You were having an argument with a little boy who was hurt. And if you just asked this question first, you could have had another conversation, which we did begin to have once I'd asked it.
Talk about the current times, being a challenge, and that God designed us with everything that we need.
Mm-hmm.
So how can a Christian today stand strong during a storm?
Yeah, that's a big question, right? We're all asking that because 2020 was certainly a storm, not simply because of the pandemic, but also on top of that, the discussion of racism and, really the whole political discussion that still reverberates through the church and caused a lot of division. So we can be really tempted, every single one of us can be tempted to just want to pull off to the side of the narrow road and wonder what we're doing following Jesus. So some things that we can know are that, like, we really were, if we're placed here now, we were designed for these times. God designed us for this. He assigned us to now. When I was homeschooling my kids years ago, some of the moms would say, I really think I was designed for Little House on the Prairie times, or, and I was like, you know what, like, if you were, then you'd be there. You were designed for now. You're equipped for now because God promises that. So, to be vulnerable with God and talk about that, say, I'm really struggling. We can look at the Psalms and see David was very vulnerable all the time with God. That's where I pour things out completely honestly. And then to find one or two other mature believers that we can be completely transparent with, and they can encourage us, so that we can say, like, we take off that smile of like everything's fine and we're just exactly who we are. Just to press into God with that, to look at the history of the church and biblical characters and know how many of them suffered, struggled through hard times, and God prevailed in their lives. So it helps to read biographies of Christians who've gone before us, and to, obviously to read God's word, but just to see the hands-on of God on so many other people's lives and know his hand is there on yours too.
I love that you're a Christian coach, and that you teach to persevere through this great adventure that Jesus has for us. So, how can we learn to be a part of that?
To be a part of God's great adventure.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. We don't want to miss it. We don't want to miss the adventure that we have in Jesus, because I love the Lord of the Rings stories, mostly because like I'm like a hobbit. And for those listeners who don't know, hobbits like to be comfortable. They like their meals on time. They think adventures are nasty things that make you late for dinner. And I really do relate to that. I want my life to be sort of predictable and sort of in control. And when Jesus comes into our lives, there's a lot that just goes on that is breathtaking, but it's not really, he pushes us into things that stretch us and change us. I encourage people into hard conversations, not because I want people to be confrontative or because I want people to be difficult, but because through those hard conversations, we get to see transformation in people's lives. We get to see God at work. And it's just so exciting. So, I say to people, take that step of faith. When you read God's word, one simple thing you can do is when you read God's word today, look at a verse and say, okay, I'm not just going to read that verse. Today, I'm going to live that verse. What does it look like today to have all my conversations seasoned with salt, to love my neighbor as myself, to, lay down my life for a friend? What does it look like today to live that verse? And ask God, I really do want to see you at work. So I am going to step out in faith, live this verse. Please show me where you're working.
Lori, thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Learn more about Lori and the book of The Art of Hard Conversations, go to Roeleveld.com. Do you want to see more videos? Subscribe today to my YouTube channel, The Call with Nancy Sabato.